Hello, and welcome to our second session of our Global Supply Chain Institute's Fall 2020 Virtual Supply Chain Forum. My name is Mary Long. I'm the Managing Director of our forum, and I just want to take a moment to say thank you so much to our forum partners for your sponsorship and partnership with us in building these events and participating in these. Without you, none of this happens, so we sincerely appreciate it. We are really looking forward to our sessions today, and I'm going to quickly cover some housekeeping items before turning it over to Janet and Justin. Just as a quick reminder, you can submit questions for the speakers through our Q&A over on the left-hand side of the app. Many of you will recognize the Q&A tool from previous in-person forum sessions, and you'll be able to upvote those questions in the queue, the ones that you find most interesting. If you do, during the session, have questions for our tech team, please leave a comment in chat or send an email to the gsci@utk.edu email address. As a reminder, we will post a recording of this session in about a week, along with a copy of the presentation deck here in our event app. So now I'm going to hand it off to my friend Janet Duffey and Justin Dillard and from Lockheed Martin, and have you both introduce yourselves. So off to you, Janet.
Oops, okay, thank you, Mary. And it's a pleasure to be here with you guys today. I will tell you, University of Tennessee has been a leader in helping establish supply chain curricula and really making us a discipline. So again, thrilled to be here today, and hopefully we'll share some insights with you that will be useful. I'm Janet Duffey, as Mary said. Been in the aerospace and defense industry, kind of both commercial and military, for a little over 30 years. Done a lot of different things with lots of different companies, but I've ended up having over 20 years of supply chain experience as a leader. And so I'm thrilled to lead the aeronautics team at Lockheed Martin. We produce the platforms that fly, so the fighter jets and the tankers and all of those kind of things. So again, you'll hear from Justin and I today on some of the things that we've seen and that we believe are important going forward. So with that, Justin, I'll turn it over to you to introduce yourself.
Thank you, Janet, and good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you're at around the world. I know we've got people from lots of different locations. So my name is Justin Dillard. I am the director for the Integrated Fighter Group line of business. So that's a fancy way of saying I have supply chain responsibility end-to-end for some of our major platforms. So the F-16 Falcon fighter and the F-22 fighter as well. So I have been with our aeronautics business unit for about 18 years. Started working for Janet probably about 4 years ago in the supply chain realm, and have had a lot of different background from analytics, sustainment, aftermarket, business capture, and have been working IFG for the past year. So Janet, back to you to kind of talk about Lockheed Martin.
Okay, let's go ahead and kick off the quick presentation that we'll share with you. Okay, so the first thing I'll do is, we love videos. We think our products show themselves the best. So we'll start off with a quick video, and then I'll give you a little bit of background on how Lockheed Martin is constructed and what our supply chain looks like.
At Lockheed Martin, we're on a mission. Your mission. Not just the next mission, but the one that's 2 steps ahead. The one that depends on solving problems before they happen. Our mission is to prepare you for the future by engineering advanced capabilities today, so that you can protect what matters most. That's why we've not only taken the lead in hypersonics, but we're helping you integrate that technology faster than ever. It's why we're not only developing the laser weapon systems you'll need, but deploying them in the field. It's why we've coded cyber readiness into everything we do. It's why we created Orion, the only spacecraft that can take humans to the moon, Mars, and beyond. Why the next generation fighter is ready to help you protect the generations to come. And why we've already built autonomous technology and artificial intelligence that advance human ability. The multi-domain battle space of the future is already here, And there's no time to waste, no time to play catch up. New age threats require new age capabilities. And that's why, at Lockheed Martin, our mission is to build the integrated solutions you can depend on. Because the world is depending on you.
That video was possible because of all the dedicated men and women we have that are dedicated to the customer's mission. So when you look at the place we sit for national defense, Lockheed Martin is very prominent in that role, and we really take it very seriously. And it's one of the great things that I've always loved about being an A&D is there's a real alignment. We may not be as close as other supply chains to customers, but we certainly can get a lot better alignment around how do we pull together, how do we do really hard creative things in support of what we need for national defense and what our customers need. If you look at it, we also have a high percent of STEM roles. So over 53% of the work that we do is technically in STEM roles. And really a lot of the business roles also have, I'll call them STEM people. So I'm an engineer by degree with an MBA. So I actually am a STEM person, but I don't practice engineering. I'm in a business discipline. So we probably are closer to 65-ish folks in STEM roles, because again, there's a high, it attracts people who like technology and like to be doing things that are kind of, I'll say, on the leading edge of technology. We also have over 15,000 suppliers, and if you look at it, half of those suppliers are small businesses. So think about that in light of the pandemic, and we'll get into that a little bit later. But very diverse population, because for us, it's regulated by the US government. So we have a small business subcontracting plan that mandates how much money we need to spend with small businesses. So we spent about $43 billion last year, and almost 6 of it was with small businesses, so about 13%. So again, when you look at the environment we operate in, they are really part and parcel of what our supply base looks like, because they tend to be a lot more agile and flexible than other companies that look like us. If you also look at it, we've also got a very diverse supply base from what they provide to us. We've got folks that do distribution with just small, I'll say, piece parts. We've got services providers that do a lot of things from personnel to facilities to 3PL or services on site. And then, of course, we have manufacturers because we ultimately assemble and deliver products. Okay, next slide. One of the great things that I have found, so I came to aeronautics back in January of 2017. And one of the things that happened at the time is the reason that Justin came and worked for me is the group that he led at the time, which was our demand and simulation. So a lot of our analytics, how do we ingest forecasting, share that with suppliers, that group was just coming to supply chain. It had previously sat at a higher level in operations. And so when it came, you can see for us, this is probably the most significant breadth of a supply chain that exists in aerospace and defense. So in a lot of cases, you'll find either the front end with the demand planning or the back end with global logistics usually sit in operations, more production operations kind of roles. But for us, I feel extremely fortunate in that it helps us create a really great value stream to work with and work out with customers, because we have a little more influence, is we have all of these disciplines, some of which are tailored to aerospace and defense. So when you look at, again, supplier diversity with the small businesses, price cost analysis, which is our financial justification to the US government customer, those are very tailored to just A&D. You wouldn't necessarily see those in other supply chains. Okay, next slide. So really, when we try to boil things down, we've been doing a lot of strategy work at Lockheed Martin and at Aeronautics to really take the diversity that you saw in the video, right? We go all the way from, space and air and land and sea. It's one of the broadest portfolios of products and services in the defense industry. So really key to that is how do we integrate that to bring a better offering to the customer? How do we exceed customer expectations? And so one of the ways that we've tried to up the game, and we'll talk a little bit about that, but it's really in managing suppliers and partnerships a lot more closely. And how do we think about risks to sources of supply? Think about the international element that really has come to light during the pandemic. How do we enable technology, which helps us with things like risk and visibility down into the supply chain? How do we become more effective and quicker? Because we are not known as a quick supply chain, I will tell you. Whenever we have a speed conversation inside the business, they always point to me and say, can't you go faster? What's taking you so long? So speed, using technology to enable speed for us while remaining compliant to the customer's regulations is really important. And then, of course, we would be nowhere without the people. So what are we doing to think about winning the talent war?
All right. Thanks, Janet. That was a great opening, and it's so helpful. I think the audio on the video came through well for the folks in our audience. So, and if not, it definitely will be embedded in that video, in the PowerPoint. One of the things that we talked about as we were preparing for this session, the theme was leadership in challenging times. So it's been a tumultuous year for sure. What is the biggest challenge Lockheed Martin's supply chain has faced over the last 12 months?
So I took a beat before I started answering because honestly, it's been nonstop this year. I mean, I will tell you again, I've over 30 years of experience and 20 as a supply chain leader. This year, I've had amazing opportunities to collaborate more broadly than I ever have, and to actually reach across and try to understand the supply base at more of a macro level than I've ever been able to do before at the corporate level. So really amazing. And when that's kind of, I'll start at the top, right? Just the macro piece. Then when we just get into our business portfolio, F-16 and F-35 are both going through a restart and a ramp. And so we were kind of climbing these big hills on those two programs, which are significant for our revenue and performance to the customer. And then all of a sudden the pandemic hits and you're like, woo, okay, what happens now? You can't pause. We were part of critical infrastructure. And so we had to figure out how we kind of, I'll say, safely stay stable through the environment. And that's where I would tell you I'm cautiously optimistic that we are. Like one event can totally kill us, and they certainly have in a couple cases at suppliers. But I honestly think the visibility into the risk and the collaboration and understanding of the suppliers' challenges in this pandemic, we're close to almost 300 suppliers, like on a daily and weekly basis right now. So I think that's been a huge challenge, but also positive. And the last thing I'll say is, you know, it's been amazing how people have pulled together. Our industry is if you're inside it, we're very known for being able to do hard things. We're kind of the hero people, right? We can like rise to an occasion. But this one's been prolonged, and I think that our employees, our extended supply base, and again, across the corporation, we've had a great opportunity to come together and stay together.
Mm-hmm. Justin, I'd love for you to jump in on this as well. And from your perspective, you know, the challenges that you faced, were they similar? Did you have different things in your area?
Yeah, thanks, Mary. And it's really, I will say, a flow down of what Janet just talked about. So I have direct engagement with our customers, so United States Air Force, foreign military sales, so international customers around the world. And it really became the conversation of communication and visibility. So as we went through this environment, it really became the challenge of, we called it jokingly COVID time. You know, before that we had time that, you know, hey, a day, you know, something like that, we're working stuff. It became COVID time, and that was like right now. And it became instantaneous through IM, text, phone calls. It was really about how quickly you can respond. And Janet mentioned the value stream concept for us. From an Aero perspective, we have end-to-end supply chain. So there are a lot of different things within that value stream that we've got to coordinate on. And that's making sure we have the right input before us with engineering, the right engineering, having the funding to go through it, working with our program management teams, all of that communication and real-time visibility is really started to mature us from a COVID time perspective and really put some of that a little bit more sense of urgency and timeline in how we communicate. And that's been a lot of our journey in the last 6 months, is that communication piece, to make sure that we're supporting both our internal commitments, but our customers as well.
I wonder, what do you see as you think about the customer and you talk about the suppliers as well, and this end-to-end supply chain? This is definitely what we are focused on teaching and researching at the University of Tennessee. So I'm wondering what you see the opportunity space for supply chain to help the business. Like where in Lockheed Martin are the opportunities?
Yeah, it's really the integration piece. So, from a commercial perspective, we saw it very early on. For whatever reason, everybody wanted to stock up on toilet paper. That was the big run on it. So, everything went out. It was real quick. And so making sure they had the visibility for us from an A&D perspective, as you went through the pandemic, and we saw it first internationally. So we've got some very key suppliers in Europe and Asia, and they started to experience it first. So we were kind of learning from that a little bit. But domestically, we fall under what's called the DIB, the Defense Industrial Base. So we had to maintain operations. We had to support our customers. They're still flying their aircraft. They still have the national security mission domestically and internationally. And so it really elevated that concept of the supply chain. Supply chain's always kind of been, 30 years ago, it wasn't a discipline. 20 years ago, as I was going through college, I was some of the first, graduates for me at my college on I'll say the foundation of the supply chain profession and a competency and a capability. So it really tried to drive to the role of supply chain. And for us from an A&D perspective, it varies by program, but 60 to 80% of our material comes through Janet's organization to support development, to support production, to support the fleet. That recognition has really been, I will say, the eye-opener over the past 6 months within an aeronautics business area.
Interesting. Janet, do you want to tag on to that one? I'm sure there are other perspectives that you have as well.
Sure. So at this point, I'll go back up to the corporate level again. One of the things I will say, and again, our former CEO, Marilyn Hewson, was front and center leading the charge for A&D. And as Justin said, one of my first COVID time assignments was, Janet, we're going to get a lot more cash from the customer, and I want it out there. Just give it to the suppliers. Figure it out. I'm like, what? Okay. So 16,000 suppliers, no criteria, no nothing. So we had to quickly look at, how do we identify financial risk? How do we call them walk-ons. Suppliers could contact us and say, we're having cash flow issues, we're having this, we're having that. How do we help, especially the small businesses? And it was all in the name of making sure that there were 3 priorities that Marilyn was always clear on for all of us. Protect the health and safety of our men and women on the job and their families. Still front and center as we're kind of reintegrating people back into the workplace. Second was, as Justin pointed out, we had to keep delivering to our customers. So anywhere, we have, I'll say, slowed down just because we couldn't keep the ramp going across the broad supply chain that we have. So we've stayed very tied into our customer, and all our products aren't the same. So what mix do you need? Let's make sure we're aligning with your needs out in the field, so we're getting you the right jets to get to the right places that you need around the world. And then third, she really challenged us. We had a team that stood up in the early days called What Can LM Do? And that was really about what resources and know-how and technology could we bring to bear as another national asset on the pandemic. When you think about how do we protect all these people who have to be in more closed spaces, and what is social distancing and safe protocols look like? And so it was, and that affects the supply chain. How do you get enough masks? How do you think about, taking temperatures and breathing equipment or contactless equipment? So I think she was really clear in all of those to kind of guide what we thought were our kind of our North Stars on where we were going.
Wow. There's that saying in supply chain, this comes up a lot when people say, we're trying to do strategy or execute while we're building the plane. And this conversation that you're talking about, it's like an example of that for sure. I know as we've talked about these, the challenges, the opportunities for supply chain and your 5 imperatives, Justin, I know that you've got some follow-up questions and a conversation that you and Janet are going to have. And so just for the audience so that you know, if I go off camera, I am still here. I am just backstage, and I'll come back on in a little bit. So Justin, I'm going to hand it off to you because I know you want to do some engagement as well.
Perfect. Thanks, Mary. And you know, that's kind of a perfect example too. We talk general leadership, but we know supply chain leadership is a little bit different because to your point, we're building things and we're looking ahead. So that risk aspect is always there. And you know, Janet walked through Lockheed Martin a little bit, and I have been extremely blessed and honored to work for this company for almost 18 years. And a lot of that has been because of the leadership. So Janet mentioned Marilyn Hewson. So she is one of the most respected leaders in aerospace defense. You know, in fact, the Fortune 50. She's constantly recognized from that standpoint. So, you know, obviously that the last thing we would want to do is lose a leader like that, so to speak, during a pandemic. But that's exactly what we did. So we actually transitioned to Jim Takelet back about 2 months ago now. So that's a testament to the leadership that she's had at the top level. Janet mentioned some very discrete actions that we were challenged with from a supply chain perspective. So as you look at it from an overall leadership perspective, but really in the supply chain, it's just a powerful piece of it. You know, and kind of to that, so I'm going to ask Hannah to kind of put up a polling question. And the polling is really around, my company has a supply chain leader at the president or CEO level of your company. And as we're going through that, I'll tell you why it's important and trying to get some feedback too. So Janet joined Aeronautics almost 4 years ago now, just shy of 4 years. Very diverse background, came from within LM, obviously, as we merged with Sikorsky. But the journey to where we are today started at that point. So as we look at that, she put in some very intentional supply chain strategies over the past 4 years that we're still going through, some we've completed as we go through. And so that, I will say, really culminated for us about 2 months ago. So in addition to the top level with Marilyn Hewson transitioning to Jim Takelet at the CEO level, 2 months ago, Janet was actually elevated to our aeronautics executive leadership team. So that is a huge win for us from a supply chain perspective and everything we've been doing over the past 4 years. Now that's after taking on the supply chain council chair. So she's been the overall supply chain lead for the entire LM business area for the past year or so. And I think she'll say it's just been the best year of her life, and she's loved every minute of it. But it's really the testament to the importance of supply chain and really leadership. So now we have that, you know, direct seat at the table. And looking at the poll, you know, online, it's about, you know, 50-50. And I will say that that's something that for us that we've looked at and really been shaping. So it wasn't just the pandemic. That was really the icing on the cake, so to speak, of everything we've been doing for the past 4 years to elevate supply chain to that table, to the C-level conversation, because of how much it drives our business and our success. And so with that, you know, Janet, can you kind of walk us through a little bit about what that transition has been like for you, both from a corporate perspective and now the past 2 months at the ELT level for us at Aeronautics?
Sure. And I'm going to share a little story of when I came to Aeronautics. So I will tell you again, I mean, I have been blessed to have worked for, you know, probably 3 of the 5 biggest defense contractors and commercial contractors in the country. So, I mean, I have a diverse background, as Justin said, just around A&D myself. But when I got to Aeronautics, it was really funny. It was kind of like you walk in and you are planted in the middle of an oak tree grove. And you look up and you see these huge oaks like the F-16 and the F-22 and the F-35 and the C-130J and the U-2 and Skunk Works. And all of these fabulous enduring defense programs have grown up as these huge oak trees that throw off a lot of shade. And so the reason they throw off shade is because they all wanted to do it themselves, and they all wanted to do it very aligned with what the customer wanted. So there wasn't a real recognition. It was very programmatic and contract focused, I would tell you. It didn't really align to how you would want to have an effective supply chain, an effective operations team, or even an effective sustainment or fleet support team. And so that's really been a huge part of what we've been doing over the last 4 years. And so when we look at it, we had to figure out, we kind of had to tell them, I want to hear you, I want your feedback. And trust me, it wasn't all good. It was, again, I told you, you're too slow. Can't you just do it? Like, just put a PO in place. You know, they used to call it hit the button, right? Just get the order out. And you're like, these are multi-million, hundreds of millions, sometimes billions of dollar orders that you can't just hit a button and then assume that everything will be fine if things happen, right? It's kind of like I'm going to liken it to a prenup when you get married. Sometimes you got to protect yourself a little more. Just, the honeymoon's always good, but, as you go through the relationship, it might be a little tougher. And so as I transitioned into this role, again, another leader who has been extremely supportive of the whole journey is Michelle Evans, who I now work for as the EVP of Aeronautics. And she really has helped us find that, I'll call it that functional excellence. We still align and support the programs, but she's giving us the space and a voice to do the work in the way that makes sense for the function. So for us, we've kind of collapsed down, the number of people who touch certain suppliers. Because again, if you think of some of the big suppliers in A&D, I probably had maybe 10 people that dealt with them just in aeronautics. So we kind of, honed that down, and we've done a lot of the positioning that has made the transition a lot easier. So I can honestly say that, this week we just started the refresh on our strategy for the business. And so getting pulled into that, how do we think about tech roadmaps and positioning suppliers for the future and not always just relying on the ones that we struggle with from the past is part of the excitement that I get to look forward to. So I think the transition, again, you never can lose execution, but this really is extending us really into the front end of the business where we can make the biggest difference.
Thanks, Janet. And part of that journey, so Janet mentioned the technical side of it. We've got a lot of technical people that we work with, a lot of technical shop within our shop as well. But really the foundational piece that we've really been looking at to help drive that from a value stream perspective is our people and our culture. So we talk about the aspects of making sure we're doing the network analysis, making sure we're procuring the right things, we've got enough lead time, we've got the right demands from a technical perspective. That's entire value stream to deliver a capability, whether that's material, a kit, an aircraft for us. But it really began about 4 or 5 years ago with what we call culture of accountability. And all the things Janet kind of walked through, that's been part of our journey, not just the results, but the how we get results. And so if we look at it from Michelle down to Janet, down to us from a supply chain, that value stream, that supply value stream is kind of how we look at it. All the way from a customer, from a contractual customer perspective to the end user out at a base somewhere around the world. It's that culture to shatter those silos, as we call it, to break down those barriers and understand it's not just an easy button. It's not an Amazon cart that you just go click and it's just readily available. We have everything that Janet mentioned, from nuts, bolts, washers, miscellaneous type of items, to major subsystems that aren't just sitting on the shelf. They're tailored for customers. They're unique. It takes time to develop. So making sure we understand that how we be agile in that environment. So part of that, Janet mentioned in several months, we flowed out billions of dollars to our supply base. That's a testament to that journey we've been on and how we were doing, continuing to mature that and evolve that to get better. It's part of that continuous improvement as we look at it from a supply chain, because, Mary had the perfect example of you're building it while you're looking ahead. That's what we do in supply chain. We all know that. But it's also making sure throughout that value stream, we understand what drives it, what are the dependencies, what are the enablers to help us go faster, smarter, more agile as we look across it. Because from an aeronautics perspective, so we look across lines of businesses, multiple programs. Janet had the opportunity to go look at that from a corporate, so multiple different business areas, same supplier, but maybe different products, different issues. So how do we go connect those dots is changing how we're engaging both internally from an aeronautics supply chain, but also as we go look at the Lockheed Martin corporate supply chain as well. And so with that, I think Mary's going to come back in. We'll have a couple more Q&As and actually engage the audience a little bit too.
Hi, it's great to be back. It was fun to hear, very interesting to hear the conversation. And while you have been talking, we have gotten many questions. So I will start off and go. And as a reminder to the audience, you can submit your questions in Q&A, and you can upvote them as well. If you see the questions and there's one that you're more interested in having it go up higher on the list, feel free. So I'll start off with Janet, this is directed to you. You spoke about how Lockheed Martin has been moving toward more of an end-to-end perspective. what are your biggest challenges to changing the mindsets within the organization to be more end-to-end? Oh, you're on mute. There you go.
Okay, I'm close too many times. You know, I'm a little excited to be here with you guys. So, okay. So what I'll say is, you know, it's funny, and Justin and I both smile at that one, because I'm going to tell you the biggest challenge, especially when it's grown up in a very siloed environment, is really education. And the example I'm going to use is forecasting. So we have been in a huge sustainment crunch. So when you look at the F-35, again, it's the big dog of the country, right? Big dog fighter program. You know, we probably went from 100 aircraft 3 years ago to almost 600 now. And we actually get to 1,000 in the next 2 or 3 years. And so it's kind of, you know, for defense, that's a pretty big ramp for the, I'll say the dollar value of that piece of equipment, right? It's a huge weapon system, very sophisticated. So you need less of them. But again, big ramp. Oops, sorry, I lost my earphone. So when I look at that, right, everybody just wanted to kind of do point solutions around everything. And so what we've had to do is kind of raise up their thinking into, you know, kind of like a black box or an input output. Something comes in, it needs to get translated within the supply chain, and then something goes out. And so it's really been about, without getting down into the bowels of supply chain and all, to Justin said, all the balancing and the thinking forward and backward that we do, how do we educate them at a high enough level that they understand what we need from them to be successful for them, I think has absolutely been the biggest challenge.
All right. Okay, great. Thank you. I am going to, this somewhat tags on in that when you think about what you talked earlier about what you're doing with suppliers and trying to keep your supply chain stabilized by investing in them, passing through the money. There are two questions related to that. One, you have flowed hundreds of millions of dollars to suppliers. Has it helped with partnerships? And then it's really about the question that relates to that is what are the motivations? Like, is it more about helping the suppliers as demand falls, or is it helping suppliers that can't keep up with demand? So I'll get, you know, I'm not sure, you know, you can both weigh in on those, but if you talk to us more, there's definitely a lot of curiosity about the supplier piece to this and what you've done there.
Okay, I'll start, and then Justin can probably give you a specific example or two, since he is probably closer to their reactions to it. So what I'll say is we purposefully looked for suppliers that we saw risk with. So we kind of took several indicators and kind of put them together in a way that we thought balanced out what the view of the risk was. And then, like I said, we kind of had a walk-on process. So at first it wasn't really active, but once they realized, we didn't want them to come forward so we could, you know, hit them on the hand or tell them we were going to come help them, and because we can kill people with kindness. It was about, how do we help you, you know, at least financially. And so I think that a huge trust that we didn't have before existed. And again, back to that little education piece I mentioned, we also had a really big tendency to blame the supply chain for everything. So we were kind of a use the bat with the suppliers. And again, we've really tried to change that over the last few years to where it's a partnership. I want you to hold me accountable for what I owe you, but I am going to hold you accountable for what you owe me. So I think it's that balance and that understanding of each other, and kind of how do you get to a mature business relationship. And some suppliers are harder than others, right? It just happens that way. But that's what I will say is, I think for us, it was more about, that was what we considered a big way we could help without trying to be too surgical, because again, with the number of suppliers we had, it just wouldn't have been feasible. Justin, you want to add anything?
Yeah, I'll add on to that, because it's really to what Janet's talking about, the partnership. So it's very much been a culture of, the aero model has grown up with procurement, and it's adversarial, and it's win-lose. I got to get the best price, and I'm going to beat you with the stick. And if I can't find a stick, I'm going to find a bat, and I'm just going to keep going up to try and get as much as I can out of it. Where the partnership we've really been transitioning into is there's a short-term aspect. So a lot of our suppliers have both commercial and defense. And as we've seen in the downturn, the commercial has really been hit significantly from an aerospace and defense perspective. People aren't flying as much, not getting as many orders. So that base has been shrinking up. So making sure for those type of suppliers, we're infusing them with the right funding to be able to support their employees, their teams to get us the material we need. And then really from a longer term perspective, Janet mentioned some examples, and we work on months and years with some of our suppliers to develop new capability. So making sure we have a little bit more of that, partnership between us, because as we go look at some of our major subsystems, they've been in the fleet for 10, 20, 30 years. They're coming towards end of life. We have diminishing manufacturing sources, DMS, to where a circuit, a board, a chip, something's going out of production. How do we have those better long-term relationships to get ahead of it, to be more agile, to respond to the customer? Because for us, from an industry perspective, within the past, I'll say 3 months, we've had a new chief of staff of the Air Force. We've had new acquisition officials, and they've both put out really around accelerate, change or lose, period, dot. And that's from the standpoint of our adversaries. They're coming at us quicker. We talk a lot about cybersecurity. That's the constant threat. All of those, how do we accelerate that change? And that's driven for us from a supply chain through the short-term impacts to make sure that our suppliers, because we're not taking the money. We're taking the money, but it's being flowed down to our subcontractors. That's the important, keeping that supply base steady, leveraging that to build better long-term relationships.
Great. Yeah, I'm wondering, as you've talked about the supplier piece, so much of that also has to do with reading where things are headed in the future. So there's a question here about the trends specific to aerospace and defense. If you could comment about what do you see as future trends impacting the industry? Not to put you on the spot, on the fly, what are these trends that are affecting you? Janet, Janet, come off mute, and Justin.
Yeah, I'm assuming I'm going to come off mute. There's always going to be something. I was not hired for my tech savvy skills, you guys. I appreciate people who are tech savvy, and I'm not the worst for my age, but not the best. So trends, and I think Justin just hit on a couple of them. So the first one is that immediate commercial downturn. So when you take that and you look at the customer expectations, that opportunity space for us is to figure out how we help them pivot from the commercial work to defense work. And part of that's on us, because commercial can contract in a much more flexible way. We get a little bit hung up on, because we use taxpayer money, and so we have a big fiduciary responsibility to justify the purchases that we make that support these big weapon systems. But how do we adopt some of those commercial practices in a way that the customer can accept to help these businesses pivot where they can to go put more work over in the defense side? Because again, even though we've had to slow down, so I'll also tell you, and the reason we've slowed down really is because of what happens when you get a COVID incident or multiple COVID incidents in your workforce. And so we've seen it across all of our aeronautics sites, across Lockheed Martin, and we've seen it with key suppliers that provide big components. So like if you're missing a tail, you're really not going to go too far, right? You kind of are let it stop, and how do you reflow work and do something different? And so when you think about that, we've actually kept our suppliers going at the same pace in order to build up buffer, because we know people are going to stumble. So that really is an unusual thing for us to do, but we did it to actually minimize risk in our supply chain so that we could absorb it as time went on. So our facility actually ramped back up in March, and frankly, selfishly, I didn't want to put our supply base through another ramp when we'd just been through a huge one the last 3 years. And so that's one of the ways that I think we're trying to balance it, and I'll say assist that trend to help us rather than hurt us. The second one is around cyber that Justin mentioned. So when we look at the unprecedented number of attacks and everything that's gone on as we all have gone virtual and electronic, cybersecurity in our products, like Justin was talking about, is really important, but there's a huge expectation that all 16,000 of our suppliers are also cyber resilient, and that they're protected, and they're protecting our information and their information that goes into our products. So there's a huge amount of regulatory work going on right now to create a maturity model for cyber in the supply chain. And that body of work has progressed very quickly, and it actually will get flowed out later this year. So that's a huge concern, is can everybody step up and make that change with us?
All right. Justin, I don't know if you wanted to come off mute and tag on to the friends, feel free, or there's many more questions. I can jump.
Yeah, I'll just add a quick take to that. So, the biggest trend that we're seeing is that acceleration of change. Mm-hmm. Typically, if you look at A&D, a lot of our life cycles just for development are 5, 8, 10 years type of thing. With the cyber that Janet talked through, with some of the commercial side of it, the adversaries that we have, the biggest trend that we see is that acceleration of change. How quickly can you get that capability onto a platform, out to the warfighter, to a government agency, to space, to wherever it may be? Because as we look at it for us, a lot of that is that interconnectivity. So Janet mentioned everything from space, air, land, and sea. It's about that connectivity across all of those domains and how quickly we can get there. But those are really the two biggest trends that we're seeing. And a lot of that comes back into the supply chain, because that's with our suppliers. That's with the components. That's with the connectivity across it. But to Janet's point, how do you keep it cyber resilient when you're trying to connect everything? It presents an interesting opportunity for us. I'll put it that way. Okay.
I know you have a couple poll questions too, but there are 2 questions related to that connectivity opportunity and trend around digitalization. And since that's a passion, I would definitely love to have you comment about what you see as the digital transformation impact. What part of that will impact Lockheed Martin, the way you operate in the future? If either one you want to take digital. Yeah.
I'll say my initial response is what won't impact us.
Yeah.
There's kind of 2 components to it. So as we look at, we call it digital transformation, enterprise business transformation. We started this journal several years ago, so we're kind of in the middle of it. As Janet mentioned, as I was coming into supply chain, I had kind of that analytics piece of it, and we really didn't have that capability. So I can clearly remember probably about 3 years ago, Janet and I have a conversation in our office, and she goes, "I need you to go to up to the Northeast and go sit on this meeting. What's it about?" "I don't know. You're going to go find out for us." And it was all about digital transformation. It was the early stages of that. And we have now, as of about a year ago, we've actually built a supply chain digital transformation office. Amy Johnson, one of my peers, she's kind of leading that effort now. And we're looking at everything from standard work tools today. How do we mature that to the next ERP, the next manufacturing execution system? How do they all connect? And I think the other side of it is from a customer perspective. I mentioned some of that connectivity. So that's what's called MDO, multi-domain operations. And that is really, I will say, going to bridge for us internally what that means across our business areas. But it's really that connectivity that we've talked about for a long time. But how do we drive that internally to connect those internally from a requirements perspective and then engage the supply base? So those have been hot and heavy for us for several years now. We're probably in, and keep me honest, Janet, probably around year 2 of a 5-year journey. And as always, it's how can we make it a 3-year journey or 3.5-year journey? It's how do you accelerate some of those things? But it's really that connectivity for DT for us internally, and how do we go connect that back to the supply base? And we've already started to flow out supplier delivery management capabilities, improving some of those, the standard work with the data that we have internally. I'll say one of the big tools that probably a lot of people on this phone talk about is SIOP, so sales and inventory operations planning. Really driving that demand forecast, that forward-looking piece of it that Janet kind of mentioned, versus today it's been a little bit, well, I got an order, I've known about it for 2 years, but I'm going to drop it today, and guess what? You're late supply chain, you suck, go get it for me.
We've never heard that before. None of us in supply chain.
Yeah, not for the faint of heart. The one thing I would also add is I think the user interface for the tools that we're creating is also really important, Mary, because what we're finding is as the new generation comes out of school and they're so tech savvy and they're so used to, like this, let me tell you, the security around our systems, we don't really have anything that's like this. And so how are we working to use their brains and their experience as they've kind of grown up with technology their whole lives into inserting that user interface and that app mentality into the tools that we bring forward?
Great. One of the things you talked about, I made you talk about digitalization, which I know we were all interested in as well. And I did want to mention as well on the cybersecurity piece, for everyone in the audience, we do have in our app a link to a series that we have done on cybersecurity in supply chain. So feel free to hit that as well if you would like more information. Now, Justin, we're going to try the poll again. So Hannah, but before you start the poll, the question that we'll get to is on the talent war. And Justin, I'll hand it off to you to lead us through that. Hannah, I think you can launch the poll, and Justin, you'll talk to it.
Yeah, absolutely. And so, the poll you'll see up here is, my company has proper incentives in place to attract and retain supply chain talent. So if you remember back to some of Janet's imperatives that win that talent war, and make no mistake, it's a war from the standpoint of our industry across industries. There's just not enough talent to go around, whether that's the technical side of it. So we're kind of managing that from both perspectives. The technology, so how do we become more efficient? How do we address not only the experienced professionals that have been with us for 20, 30, 40 years to the just out of college and getting them up to speed as quickly as we can. So we've actually stood up an SCM Academy that really brings people in from external, and then they could be college hires, they could be retired military, they could be anything, but getting them into the aero supply chain, the tools we use, the processes we have to follow, the DFARS requirements from a government perspective, all of those things that tie into it, and really kind of broadening from an internal perspective the talent at a leadership level, and really starting to identify those 3, 4, and 5 that'll feed into that pipeline. So I will say, the executive staff that Janet had 4 years ago looks completely different than it does today for a variety of reasons. The diversity, the backgrounds, the experiences, it's very much changing from strictly a procurement to a supply chain and an end-to-end. And part of that is driven by intentional talent management that we have with Janet and across our senior staff. So it's that internal piece, but also engaging with University of Tennessee, Knoxville. And, I apologize, Mary, but we do talk to other universities. We try and get that talent where we can, but really engaging with in the classroom, understanding where the trends are going. How do we engage with students? What do they want to see? What are their interests? And making sure we're connecting for that next generation that's coming in every single year. So it's really a multifaceted approach for us. And, it's encouraging to see that. I see 64%, as we've got some of the respondents in here, that has the proper incentives. I will say in the 18 years I've been with Aero, it has changed a lot, but we still got a ways to go in that talent war. And Janet's been a big advocate for that. I know Michelle is from an aeronautics perspective as well. But this is one that I think will continue to be a challenge for us from an Aero and at least some of us in the supply chain forum today.
All right.
So can I jump in here for 1 sec, Mary? Because Justin, so I'll give you the example. Justin has, since he and I have been together in like early 2017, he's had 4 different jobs in that period of time. So that's pretty quick, right? I mean, I'm like, hey, what about this? Go try this, right? And he's not the only one, right? We've probably moved, I would say at least 50% of our directors now at this point, and we're down another level working it as well as down at the IC level. But I think that when I look at the leadership team that I have today, I will tell you, with what we've been through with COVID, I would stick them up against any supply chain team in the A&D space. Absolutely fabulous, dedicated leaders, and really great at transitioning. We were pretty stodgy on on telecommuting. So we did not have a lot of virtual people. And, within like 3 days, we're like, oh, everybody's virtual, and 30% new people in the last 18 months. And so, everybody embraced it and ran with it. And again, phenomenal team that I can't say enough good things about.
That is always, we could end on that, but we have more time, so I'm not going to let us quite end on that. But that is such a great message for, all companies. We were all struggling with trying to make that pivot. So it's really good to hear, especially with 30% new people. So this has been such an interesting and interactive session. And thank you so much. I did want to get some feedback from the audience. So I'm going to prompt that now, but we are going to close with one closing question. So stay with us, but please give us your feedback. These forum sessions don't happen without us listening to what you really want to hear from us and how you want to hear it. So take the time to give us that feedback. Thanks so much for your participation. We know your time is valuable, and we are honored that you have taken time to spend it with us today. As a reminder, we'll post a recording of this session in a week, along with a copy of the presentation deck. And that will be in the app. So as a final question, I think a good one, we won't get to everything, but a final one to end on. I think a good one would be, how has the role of supply chain changed during the pandemic? Not that we end on the pandemic theme, but that idea of change is such a key one to take us forward to the future. So Janet, I'll have you start us off, if you don't mind, on that one.
Okay, and I will tell you, I kind of alluded to it before, but what I will tell you, for me, and again, I've got to do lots of crazy things. Everybody kind of has a personality in their journey. My personality has been find a place that really needs help and go throw Janet there. That's kind of where I've come from. In aeronautics was the first job I took that wasn't in that place. And so what the pandemic has done for us as a company, and us as a supply chain, and us as a business, and us with our suppliers, is it gave us that alignment and common thread of what we needed to do to be better together and stronger. And so I think a lot of the transparency and the collaboration and just less mistrust between parties, because it was more needed in order to get to the other side of problems. I think for me, that's been the absolute positive side of it. And like Justin said, when I was at corporate, there would be Saturdays and Sundays, I'd be on the phone with our head of contracts and our finance and our payables people, and would be like, hey, we're going to do this on Monday. How are we going to do it? And we'd be like, oh, okay, let's talk about it. And we'd roll up our sleeves and we'd figure it out. That really wouldn't have happened before. It would have been like, so assign a team and let's have that team get together, and then let's do a go back, and then we'll figure out how to implement it. So the speed and the creativity around the pandemic for me has been amazing. And again, COVID time's not great, but it's been exciting.
Right. And I know this whole COVID time, that whole behavior of let's have a meeting to prep for the meeting, like all of that just totally.
We love that being gone.
Yeah. I think everyone does. Yeah, for sure. Justin, if you wanted to tag on there.
Sure. Just to add on what Janet talked about, I think there's two things that have really been the experience for me personally in my role in the past 6 to 9 months. And it's really around that resiliency piece. And it's the flexibility to how we engage our customers, how we engage our teams. I'm in the office about half the time. Most of my team is remote. We've been dealing with, supplier issues, what we can and can't travel. I've had some of my team in, halfway around the country trying to find grandparents for their kids, things that I wouldn't have anticipated dealing with, 12 months ago. But that resiliency is what it takes. And Jenna mentioned it from a leadership or team. That's really that connectivity between us. And I think really the hedging or contingency. So that from a supply chain, we all know that as supply chain professionals. But that recognition from a business perspective has been increased exponentially of how do we have to go. We can't just, have one plan and go do it. we have to fund, we have to invest and prepare for contingencies. I mean, nobody could have predicted the COVID pandemic. However, how do we leverage that into our daily operations moving forward and making sure we have contingency plans in place? We've thought through those risks, we have mitigations in place to prevent them from becoming issues. That has been elevated significantly, especially for us from a supply chain perspective.
All right. Well, this has been a really great session. I have learned so much. It's reassuring to hear that the impression I had of aerospace and defense was that you had a lot of acronyms, and you did get to weave some of those in there naturally, like as you were talking, and I picked up on some new ones, so that is great. We all have those. I think supply chain is the alphabet soup of acronyms. So thank you so much for such a warm and really engaging session. I really appreciate it. Thanks everyone for being with us today. Thank you to all the foreign partners. We hope that you are all able to join our sessions next week. We have a really special breakout session planned for Tuesday with Cole Burns, our Director of Supply Chain Management Career Management. We will be interviewing a panel of students on their virtual internship experiences from this past summer. Then on Wednesday, we have our next mega session, which is navigating a global supply chain, and that is with David Morgan and Kevin O'Meara from Shaw Industries. We'll wrap up the week with a breakout session hosted by myself and Dr. Mary Holcomb on the latest GSCI white paper, The Future Trends Shaping Transportation. So thanks again for being here. We do really look forward to seeing you again soon. And Janet and Justin, thank you so much. It was really wonderful to do this session together. I really enjoyed it.